Hello and welcome to another episode of Archery Releases Ad Nauseum, and today I'm going to pick apart tomorrow's Resources Unlimited, aka TRU Ball's new handheld release for 2023, the Trident. Now I know everyone can see the runtime on this video and think, how much can this lunatic possibly say about one release? He's nitpicking. Well, my plan is to say everything I think everyone should know, and try to help you make an informed purchase. I mean, these things are expensive. We can't go out and buy every release on the market and hope we get one that works for us. That's different. So for people who don't want to listen to me yammer on for 5,516 words, I will post time codes for different topics so you can skip around. Also, I'm going to do a brief summary at the end of this video, so if you want a quick assessment without the explanation behind it, please skip to this time code. If you want to know how I arrived at that assessment, please stay tuned. Before I get started, I think it's important to mention that I have no affiliation with TRU Ball Archery or any archery manufacturer, well, except myself. I am not sponsored by any company, and I have not been sent any products to evaluate. Everything I have reviewed thus far has been purchased with my own money, my opinions are my own, and I think there's value in that. So let's get started. So this particular model is the Trident Pro Medium. I ordered the medium and the large at the same time from Lancaster Archery Supply. I have not yet received the large, probably because TRU Ball hasn't started making them yet. Archery companies don't seem to show much love for the big guys until us manlets get ours. When I do receive it, I'll add it to my sizing guide, though technically it's already there. I also ended up buying the regular Trident as well, the all-aluminum version, just to make sure that my holsters fit both of them, and make sure that I don't, no surprises there, and to be able to compare the two and make sure, and find out whether one is better than the other performance-wise. So this review is going to be a mixed bag. On one hand, I like the idea of this release, and I like that TRU Ball is not afraid to put out things that are different and innovative, as is the case with the Trident, the Executive Hinge, the Go-To, well, sort of on that one, and the Abyss Extension Flex. On the other hand, I can't help but listen to how TRU Ball describes the feature set of the Trident and how its design produces superior results over what came before it, and I start to wonder how much of that is actually going to translate into real-world results. What are you getting from this release that you wouldn't get from what you're already using, or another premium release that is already on the market? On the other hand, what else was I expecting them to say about their new product? They aren't going to come out and say, here's our new thing, it'll perform about the same as our old thing, but you should buy it because it's new and cool. I would actually admire a company that would be that forthright with its customers. It's getting tough to come up with new ideas, and it's become the industry standard to put out new items every year, regardless of whether they're better than what came before them. PSE actually tried a similar tact a few years back when they chose to advertise more honest speed numbers for their bows. I believe it was the Evoke series. They did this knowing their bows would either hit the numbers or exceed them in real-world settings. Instead, what happened was they were eviscerated by the public for putting out slow bows because the rest of the competition continued to fudge their numbers. So that was an unfortunate short-lived experiment with honesty in marketing because they just went back to doing what everybody else was doing. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, I suppose. So, let's talk specs and features, and then I'm going to pick apart claims TRU Ball made about the Trident in its product walkthrough video. I kind of like that TRU Ball makes those things because it kind of gives me an idea of what they think of their release and what they think they can say to the public in terms of what's going to convince them to actually want to purchase it. So it's nice. I wish the other companies would do the same thing because it gives me plenty of fodder to pick apart and either affirm or criticize, for lack of a better description. So the Trident comes in a blister pack, like all of TRU Ball's products. It doesn't come in a fancy box like other similarly priced premium releases, and I have zero issues with this. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I am more interested in how it works and performs than what it arrived in. In the package, you get the release, a lanyard cord, and the instructions. There are no tools included in the package anymore. The absence of included tools is not a big deal as long as the tools needed to adjust it are easily available. I point it out because some of the release manufacturers seem to be on the similar track where they are no longer including any items that aren't absolutely necessary. More on that in a moment. I'm not going to cover what's on the insert with the instructions because I usually don't read them unless there's something on the release that I can't figure out just by looking at it. The Trident is not a complicated release, so its card remains unexamined. The Trident comes in two versions. One has a solid aluminum handle and is just called the Trident Flex, and the other is half aluminum, half nickel coated brass, which TRU Ball refers to as Quicksilver, to sound fancy, and it is called the Trident Pro Flex. It's a similar scheme they did with the blade. The solid-handled blades had an aluminum version with polymer scales, and it was just called the Blade, and another version that was half nickel-plated brass, Quicksilver, and half aluminum, and it was called the Blade Pro. Now there is just the Blade Pro Flex, and it's half Quicksilver and half aluminum. I'm just going to refer to this one as the Trident for the remainder of this video, regardless of whether I'm talking about the all-aluminum Trident or the Trident Pro Flex, just because when I was doing the Abyss Extension Flex, it got really tedious having to keep saying the entire name over and over again. The Trident's most recognizable feature is, instead of a single jaw or hook, the Trident uses a three-spoked gear, which TRU Ball calls the tri-hook system. This is the third release where TRU Ball has employed this. The first was the Extension RT wrist release, then the Abyss Extension Flex, and now the Trident. The tri-hook operates by having one spoke hold the D-loop and serve as the hook, while one of the other spokes that's in the inside of the release acts as what would be the internal part of the single hook that interacts with the internal sear and the trigger components. When the internal sear moves and the release is activated, the force of the bowstring moving forward pulls the hook open, rotates the gear, recocks the trigger, technically, and exposes the next hook. So because the system resets itself using the force from the bowstring, it doesn't need to be cocked like most high-end thumb releases. By contrast, the double sear type thumbs, and here we go, like the Blade, use an internal mechanism and springs to either hold the hook closed and release it, like a Stanonics, Perfex, or UV button, or force the jaw out of the way of the D-loop, which is what the Blade and releases like the Carter Wise Choice does. So this is actually a pretty neat feature, and it's unique, and while I could mention that it will save you all of about half a second over a release with a cocking button, I can also justify having a release that doesn't need to be cocked or reset manually. You might be hunting and want to ensure an ethical kill, you could be in a competition setting with money on the line, your friends might all be watching you and just itching to roast you if you muff your shot, or you might just be the kind of person who has so many other things to think about outside of archery that one fewer thing you need to get on target may actually be just what you're looking for. I might make a similar statement or argument about keeping your release in a holster instead of a release pouch, but this video is already very long. You know, being able to just pull it out in the exact angle that you need it, you know, and have it right at that spot so you can just save a couple extra seconds, but yeah, I'm not going to say that. So with the Trident, we have the benefit of not needing to reset it. That's good. However, you can't get something for nothing, and the next question we should be asking is, what's the catch? Well, we'll get there. I made a prediction when pics came out of the Trident a few months ago that they would take the mechanism from the Abyss Extension Flex, which is over here somewhere, and I've reviewed it previously, and eliminate the tension mode to make a dedicated thumb release. Whether they did adapt that design into the Trident, I don't know for certain, but the results are very similar. I made a prediction when pics came out of the Trident a few months ago that they would take the mechanism from the Abyss Extension Flex, which is over here somewhere, and I've reviewed it previously, and eliminate the tension mode to make a dedicated thumb release. Whether they did adapt that design into the Trident, I don't know for certain, but the results are very similar. Because the Trident is an open hook design, it cannot be locked onto the D-loop. However, there is a lanyard attachment point on the back of the Trident, same as the Blade, so you can let it hang from your wrist if you so elect, or keep it in your holster or pouch when not in use. Design-wise, the Trident has the same casing as the Blade Pro Flex with a few aesthetic tweaks. On the surface, this isn't an issue because the blade has a comfortable handle and is very lightly tapered. and has good ergonomics, which explains why it's been in TRU Ball's lineup for almost a decade. However, they left the design of the case largely unchanged, other than doing away with the checkering on the sides and the stickers, which I'm happy not to have to account for them in the holster design, because I have to keep from trying to shear them off. See, this one doesn't have any stickers left. They didn't even change the top of the neck that formed a nice symmetrical arc with the hook on the blade. It makes the design look repurposed. Or, yeah, I guess repurposed is probably the best way I can describe it. You'd think they'd want to at least change this hooked part to make it look, cut this off and make it look a little more complete, not like it was literally something else before and they changed the internals. Also, for some reason, they chose to reverse the sides of the aluminum and quicksilver halves of the casing, so the Blade Pro Flex and Trident are mirror images of each other. The initial prototype they showed at ATA even had a plug in the hole where the blade's cocking button protrudes. Thankfully, they closed the back off with the production model, because that really would have looked like a kit bash. The case on the Trident is laser etched with the name of the release and a Trident symbol on the Quicksilver side, and TRU Ball's logo on the aluminum side with some reference arrows, one of which is not actually pointing towards what it's supposed to be. I will elaborate on that shortly. On a separate note, if I look at the aluminum version, the logo with the Trident logo itself actually has a little crown design on the inside, and they really overpowered the laser when they did the Quicksilver end of it, so they probably should have did a test piece. I don't have a ton of experience using lasers, but I always test out a new piece of material before I do it, because the crown part that's on the aluminum one versus what's on the Quicksilver is really burned out, like they just overpowered it for the sake of speed, I guess. So just like the blade, the middle and ring finger beds on the Trident, I don't know if you could see it there, have traction milled onto them. Like most of the newer TRU Ball handhelds, there are vertical lines on the middle finger bed and vertical scallop lines on the flex fingers. The index finger is left smooth. I'm not sure why they chose to leave it smooth or why they use different machining on different parts, but that's how it be. Having traction on your release, as people who use, skateboard tape and stuff already understand, gives you more grip, and it also locks your fingers into whatever position you had them when you drew your bow. I mentioned this in my Scott Apex Core and Select Hinge video, that releases tend to move around a lot more than we notice when the finger beds are smooth, and it becomes very noticeable when you go from one with smooth finger beds to a release with traction. I know some archers use skateboard tape on their releases to keep them from slipping. I don't, but now I can kind of see why somebody would. The Trident comes in medium and large, and TRU Ball does size up the bodies of their releases enough to be able to see and feel a difference between them. However, they skimp out and use the same flex fingers for the medium and the large, and the 3-finger flex piece is slightly oversized. It kind of splits the difference between the medium and the large. Consequently, if you have larger hands, and by the large, it should feel correct. But if you are using the medium and have smaller hands, then the ring finger bed is going to feel roomy. The 4-finger flex attachments are the reverse, and people using the large may find it snug, while those of us using the medium will find it comfortable. It's especially noticeable when coming from a release like the Stan Onyx, when each of the 5 sizes in which it is offered have matching finger attachments. So there are, not only is there a large Onyx body, there is a large finger attachment in 4-finger and 3-finger, as is the small, medium, large, extra large, and extra large. The Trident accepts the same flex finger attachments as the other flex models in TRU Ball's lineup and offers 30 degrees of sweep adjustment. It comes with a 3-finger untapered flex finger, and one of the things they mentioned in the product walkthrough video is that the attachments necessary to convert the Trident to a 4-finger are no longer going to be included in the packaging. They will be available for purchase separately, and the same goes for all other flex models, which include the Blade, Goat, HT Flex, Abyss Extension Flex, Abyss Flex, Fulcrum Flex, HBC Flex, and now the Trident. So they're following UltraView's example, and you archers who prefer 4-finger releases have to pony up extra money. It's probably going to be like an extra $40 or $50 to set it up the way you want, when this is already pretty darn expensive. I know there are more 3-finger archers than 4-finger, but I really do not like this trend of offering less in the package for the same price or higher. I know times are tough, but with all the options that are available, do you really think nickel and diming your customers is a good idea? I mean, there are still companies at the moment, now the companies that offer their releases in a package, meaning that you get the stuff to make them at least a 3 and 4-finger, are B3, Scott, Stanislavski, and Truefire. So that list keeps getting smaller and smaller, and they're trying to give us less for more. The Pro version of the Trident comes with a multi-axis thumb barrel assembly, and the all-aluminum one comes with just their basic thumb barrel, 90-degree thumb barrel setup. The multi-axis thumb barrel assembly can be purchased for the aluminum Trident, but you're looking at an additional $50. So you really might as well just buy the Pro version, since you end up even money, and if you end up buying them separately. So you can buy this, but if you buy that separately, it's going to cost pretty much as much as this. So might as well just buy this one. You can also take off the thumb barrel and attach it directly to the trigger stem on both this one and this one. But if you do it with this one that comes with the multi-axis thumb barrel assembly, you actually have some angle adjustment there. So if you need it shorter or closer to the body, then you can just attach this directly. You can do the same thing for this one, but it just makes another 90-degree, basic, simple thumb barrel. The multi-axis thumb barrel assembly is anodized aluminum, it is gunmetal gray, and that color doesn't match anything else TRU Ball makes, and that really bothers me. I don't know why it isn't just black like the rest of the aluminum parts. It has 3 threaded holes on the post to adjust its length, and the thumb barrel is threaded on top of the post to adjust its angle. So there's a good amount of adjustability there, and you should be able to set it up wherever you need it. So along with the color of the I don't know if it's a durability thing, maybe that anodizing has to be gray as opposed to black. But along with that, the other thing that bothers me about TRU Ball is they insist on using a Phillips head screw to attach their thumb barrels to their trigger post, while the rest of the release is covered in screws that use Allen keys. That Phillips head screw just looks out of place in my opinion, and I believe it cheapens the aesthetic. It does the job, but it doesn't belong on a $300+ release. You should just have, and it also fails the whole test of me wanting to be able to adjust it on using my little yellow folding Allen key set. So it's just one extra tool that you might have to carry around. Not that everybody wouldn't carry around a Phillips head, but it's just one extra thing to worry about. And this release is all about not having to worry about extra things. Another feature, or specific to the Trident and, other releases, the Trident requires tension against the hook to function. So setting it up has to be done with a release trainer or the bow. There's a general assumption I make when I find out a release needs tension on the hook in order to function, and that is the trigger is not going to have a crisp break. Please keep that in mind. I'm not done with it yet. So if you don't have a length of cord handy, you can operate the Trident with your finger if you press against this exposed hook. The system requires about 4 pounds of pressure against the hook to allow the hook to rotate as per the walkthrough video. This is one reason I think I'm right about the design from the Abyss Extension Flex being adapted to the Trident. It functions like a resistance-activated release with the tension set too light, and since the Abyss Extension Flex disengages the safety by pressing the trigger, it behaves like a thumb release when set lighter than the holding weight of the bow on which it is being used. If it was designed differently than that, the hook would open when the trigger is pressed, tension on it or not, kind of like a B3 exit. You would just hit this trigger and then the hook would just flop right open, unassisted. Also, if you press and hold the thumb barrel down, you can cycle through the hooks by pressing down hard enough on them. This doesn't really help you set it up, but you can annoy the people around you if your hands are free and you don't have something else like a click pen to fidget with. The hook now has magnetic retention to keep what I'm going to call the hot hook, which would be the one that you would hook up to the D-loop. to keep that in kind of the ready position. They didn't actually think to install a magnet on the Abyss Extension Flex, and the result was having to touch the hook every time to expose the hot hook, which leaves the whole no cocking button aspect of the release not fully realized. The idea for it is to be ready to go without additional input from the Archer, and with the Trident, they did correct this mostly. You can rotate the tri-hook and get it stuck with a hot hook out of position, but during normal operation, it seems to advance the hook and keep it in the ready position most of the time. On my shot trainer, if I try to pull hard against the wall and pull the trigger, the hook actually can rebound and then get stuck in that position and need to be flicked. It functioned correctly on my bow so far, so it might just be I might just be pulling excessively hard into that and causing it to rebound. It doesn't have a strong hook, but it's enough to keep it from ending up out of position by at least flicking it around. So that's something. The product walkthrough video they released on March 22nd, it is April 23rd now, contains a lot of information about the operation of the release, how to adjust it, and its overall features. They also spend a good amount of time code explaining why the Trident is a superior design, and how it outperforms other releases, allegedly. They use the blade as a target of comparison, because it's the same release but with different guts, while also referencing the nebulous other brands. They also threw some numbers into the mix, and I'm going to break those down and let you know if they may or may not actually produce better results than what you are already using. So claim number one is that it's quiet. TRU Ball is making the claim that the Trident is the quietest thumb-activated release on the market by a margin of 10 decibels, which technically means it's half as loud as whatever they're saying it is. They don't mention what releases are actually measured against it. I would imagine the Blade was one of them. But I can actually prove that this claim is wrong right here. There are thumb-activated releases on the market that make almost zero noise. Allow me to demonstrate. This is the Hotshot Vapor 2. With this release, the hook is linked to the trigger and it moves in unison with it. It doesn't have a double sear. If they're going to add additional caveats, they're going to have to say sear activated release or something like that. It's kind of like the stats in football where it's like the most yards from a running back that's under 5'7" and in his third year of free agency. If they go to stats like that, one, it becomes meaningless, but the other thing is it just gets, lost in the mix. You don't know what it actually means. So anyway, this is what the Vapor 2 sounds like on a shot trainer. I'm going to try not to punch the target next to me in order to show, but here it is. Let's do it again. Here is the Trident on my release trainer. So the Trident is definitely quiet, but it's not the quietest. My other issue is that a release being quiet doesn't get you much because the quietest bow is still louder than the loudest release. It does have the advantage of the auto reset and not needing to be cocked though, so that's something. That's a noise that occurs separately from the noise of the shot. The release of the pull of the trigger, the release of the jaw is one thing, but the actual cocking of it does make noise, so that's something to think about. And I found through testing that there are actually some thumb releases that are louder to cock than they are to shoot. UV button is actually kind of like that. That's going to be another video I make now that I have more time to do it, and it's going to be involving a sound meter and a lot of the releases behind me, or at least one of each action, because different releases, like different carders, have the same internal mechanism but just a different handle. So I'm not going to test every one of them. I'm just going to pick one with the same action and then do a test. And then if there's any additional minutia like the mass of the handle or something, I'll have to take that into account as well. But anyway, sorry TRU Ball, this is not the quietest release, thumb-activated release that's out there. The second selling point is the TriStar hook system has no cocking button and uses the energy of the bow to activate the release after the trigger is pressed by whatever method of execution you choose to use. Back tension is not necessarily the be-all and end-all. I'll just leave that for another time. The result is an increase in forgiveness and accuracy by shortening the amount of time between when the trigger is pressed and when the hook releases, which is a concept called lock time in the firearms community. This is in comparison to a double sear, which has a chain of parts that have to move between the thumb barrel and the hook and rely on springs to move the parts in the chain and open the hook. So the Trident is supposed to have a faster lock time and give you less of a chance to float off target versus whatever you're using now. My question to them would be, how much of a difference is it? How do you measure that? And how much of a difference would it actually make if the hook on your release opens faster than your other release by a measure of milliseconds? I think the answer is going to depend on the archer. I can find out by shooting the blade and the Trident side by side and checking the size of my groupings. If my groups are tighter with the Trident, all other things being equal, then there might actually be something to it. So I don't, on the surface, really have an issue with that the lock time's faster. I just don't know how much of a difference it's actually going to make. One thing I will say, though, is that when a company invokes the term forgiveness in their marketing, I would recommend you proceed with caution. When people use the term forgiveness, they are implying that a piece of equipment will help to minimize mistakes made by the archer. I am of the opinion that no one piece of equipment or aspect of a piece of equipment is going to automatically make shots or bad shots better. I just thought of this as I wrote this script, but I believe that there are 3 other F's that you should focus on if you want to maximize your accuracy, or 4 if you are as out of practice as I am right now. Those are fit, familiarity, and form. I'm going to expand on why I think the idea of forgiveness is nonsense in another video. It gets thrown around a lot to describe bows, arrows, and releases, only to have somebody else explain why the opposite of whatever that person said was true. The placebo effect is an amazing phenomenon. But fit, familiarity, and form. So if a product fits you, if it fits you right, if you understand and are used to its operation, and your form is consistent, you don't have to worry about whether something else is inherently going to make your shots better. They also state that a higher holding weight makes the release feel crisper and would be better for archers who command their shot. While it makes sense that more weight pulling against the hook would make it snap open faster, I don't think it's a groundbreaking statement that is unique to the Trident. The bigger issue I have with that statement is the use of the word crisp in describing the trigger on the Trident. I'm going to do a whole other video. I keep saying that a lot, and I have a really big list, but you're going to hear that a lot. I'm going to do a whole nother video. But I'm going to do a whole nother video explaining what it should mean when someone describes a trigger as crisp. I have a lot of videos planned, by the way. The short of it is that there is a difference between a trigger with a wall and a defined break, and a trigger that has no break point but does not require a lot of travel to activate. The Trident has the latter. It has no wall or break point. It's just an even, consistent pressure until the hook releases. If anybody remembers, that's the exact same description I gave to the Abyss Extension Flex. It's nice, and it's harder to predict when it's going to go, but it isn't crisp. I describe it as a rolling trigger, if you're familiar. Some handguns, like from the 90s or something, you don't really feel when it's going to go. You just kind of pull straight through it, and at some point the hammer drops. You press it down, and you can feel movement, but it doesn't have a snapping a glass rod feel of other high-end releases. The blade, by comparison, can be set with a wall and a defined breakpoint. The blade is crisp. It can also be set up like a rolling trigger by increasing its travel, but the Trident will never feel like the blade. It's just going to be, you can shorten the travel, but you can't really make it feel like that little glass rod snapping feel of a release with a good double sear. So if you're looking for a thumb release with a crisp trigger, the Trident is going to disappoint you. Its operation is going to feel similar to releases with much lower price tags, with the following exception. The internal mechanism of the Trident, as well as every other double sear thumb release, i.e. the ones that need to be cocked in order to function, they're designed to isolate the force of the bowstring pulling against the hook or jaw from the operation of the trigger. So no matter how much force is pulling on the hook, the trigger should maintain a consistent pull weight. Less expensive single sears have a more direct connection to the hook, and their pull weights can vary based on how much force is pulling against the hook. With the Trident, it doesn't have a crisp trigger in that way, but it does have a consistent pull weight. So whether you like the feel of the trigger or not is going to depend on how you like to set up your thumbs. If you tried the Abyss Extension Flex and didn't like it in thumb mode, you're not going to like the Trident. It is not going to behave like the Blade or any of the super high-end releases like the stands and the UV buttons and stuff like that. It's different. It's not necessarily bad, and I actually like it, but this is not about what I like. It's about what you can use and knowing what you're getting when you make your purchase. The final claim TRU Ball made, and this is going to be a fun one for me, was the tri-hook design has a lower variance in point of impact when held at different angles versus a release with a side opening jaw like the Blade. So supposedly, the Trident will be more forgiving if you are not anchoring with your hand at the exact same angle every time you draw your bow, come to anchor, and execute your shot. Okay, it is understandable that a hook that opens like a swinging door, which is actually most of them up there, it makes sense that something like that is going to release the arrow in a more linear direction when it's held at different angles versus one with a jaw that opens in one direction like the Blade, Carter Wise Choice, Chocolate Addiction, Convertible, etc. The former is basically being pulled open by the string, while the latter has to basically get itself out of the way and may cause some lateral knock travel as the D-loop moves around it. So I can understand what they're driving at, but when I break down the numbers they provided into a range in which we would actually be using it, or we would experience, the difference starts to really look negligible. So the claim they're making is when you loose an arrow with the Blade at your normal anchor point and then flip it over 180 degrees, because that's something we would do in a real-world scenario, the spread between the first and second arrow would amount to 5/8 of an inch at 20 yards. The Trident, by comparison, has a variation of 1/4 inch at 20 yards when rotated 180 degrees. So if you're looking for a release that gets you the similar results on flat ground as well as hanging upside down from a tree like a bat, then the Trident is a better option than others. So as I was just alluding, the framing of this point is bizarre, because why would you shoot it like this and then expect it to behave the same if you shoot it like this? But anyway, let's break it down into a more practical range that we might actually experience. The number they provided translates to, and for the sake of argument, let's assume it's a 1-to-1 equivalent, so I don't have to calculate arc lengths, because we're technically talking about 180 degrees. If you take 5/8 of an inch and divide it by 180 degrees, and take 1/4 of an inch and divide it by 180 degrees, you end up with 0.00347 inches of point of impact variation per 1 degree of rotation for the Blade, and 0.00138 inches per degree of rotation for the Trident at 20 yards. For reference, the thickness of a human hair is 0.001 or 1/1000th of an inch. So if the angle of your release at anchor varies by as much as 20 degrees while using the Blade, which could happen with any release, you sometimes might hold it flatter, you may hold it up in an angle depending on the consistency of your form, but using the Blade, your impact point is going to be different by only about 1/16th of an inch at 20 yards with a 20-degree variation of release angle, and about 1/32nd of an inch with the Trident at 20 yards with 20 degrees, and then you could just, extrapolate it from there. Now, there may be archers that might take advantage of that added tidbit of consistency, but I don't think I will ever be among them. I don't think... there is a significance, depending on what you think of as statistically statistically significant, it is technically twice as consistent, but you're literally splitting hairs. The other thing to consider is if you're going to be using the same release, which is what you should do to achieve maximum accuracy and consistency, then you're going to be using that release when you tune and sight in your bow. Any lateral nock travel produced by your release is going to be accounted for and tuned out when you tune the bow to your arrows, your rest, and to yourself. If you switch releases, it might matter, but I don't think it's going to matter significantly enough for the majority of archers to notice, all other things being equal. So your bow is inherently going to behave differently when you change releases that do something significantly different. Like just because, I make the point, just because your hinge has and your thumb release have the same point of impact doesn't mean that everything else is going to be the same, like your back wall pressure or other things that you do along with it. So that's only one component, but all the same, if you want to make maximum accuracy, you have to use the same release and you have to tune your equipment to the release, just like you have to tune your equipment to yourself. So that's about it for the claims. I hope that some of that made sense, and it showed that for the most part, it's a neat design, but it's not, I don't really think it's superior. It might be better in a statistically significant way, but when you add in the human factor, then I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make, and I think it's going to depend on who's using it. So, moving on. The other thing to consider is if you're going to be using the same release, which is what you should do to achieve maximum accuracy and consistency, then you're going to be using that release when you tune and sight in your bow. Any lateral nock travel produced by your release is going to be accounted for and tuned out when you tune the bow to your arrows, your rest, and to yourself. If you switch releases, it might matter, but I don't think it's going to matter significantly enough for the majority of archers to notice, all other things being equal. So your bow is inherently going to behave differently when you change releases that do something significantly different. Like just because, I make the point, just because your hinge has and your thumb release have the same point of impact doesn't mean that everything else is going to be the same, like your back wall pressure or other things that you do along with it. So that's only one component, but all the same, if you want to make maximum accuracy, you have to use the same release and you have to tune your equipment to the release, just like you have to tune your equipment to yourself. Fit and finish is very good, as one would expect from a release of this price point, and from TRU Ball, because they're known for having good fit and finish of their releases. The anodizing on the aluminum side is consistent and absent of discoloration, and the Quicksilver side is the same. The tri-hook and trigger stem are well polished, stainless steel, with some light tooling marks on the trigger stem. You can kind of, if you put it up to the light, you can kind of see a little bit of tooling marks on there. One thing I did notice is the seam where the aluminum and the Quicksilver halves meet. You can feel the Quicksilver side is slightly oversized and the edge is raised around the entire perimeter of the release. TRU Ball is usually impeccable when it comes to machining tolerances, and the blade's case marries up perfectly. You can barely even feel the seam. Not so much with the Trident. This one is an early run, so maybe they'll tighten it up, but there is a ever so slight drop off between the blade and the Trident. The travel and tension adjustment out of the box with the Trident was set very light and very touchy. When I pulled mine out and tried it on a release trainer, I could barely get my thumb on the barrel before the hook would let go. So I needed to increase the tension so I could command the shot the way I prefer. Adjusting the trigger on the Trident is the same as the blade. There are two very tiny locking screws on the sides. TRU Ball is not one of those companies that believes locking set screws are unnecessary, and they put them all over their releases. You loosen the lock screws, and you turn the tiny set screw on the spine of the release under the trigger stem to adjust the travel, and the larger set screw at the top of the index finger bed to adjust the trigger tension. There are arrows lasered onto the aluminum side of the case indicating where the locking set screws are located. However, one of the arrows is actually pointing at the wrong hole. It would appear they took the file for the laser etching design from the TRU Ball Rave, as I drop it, but I'm going to show you what they did. If you see the... How close can I get that? So if you see that design where it says... let me try... If you can see where it says lock, if I can get it to focus... If you see where it says lock, it looks a lot like they took that design and they put it here. Except the problem is there's an extra hole on that side, which would have been on the other side of the locking screw hole if they had just made the Trident's case identical to the blade. And that hole was in the way of the reference arrow that shows where the locking set screw is located. So instead of changing the design so the arrow goes around it, they just shortened the arrow and left it pointing at the wrong hole. I just had a thought from George Carlin just pop into my head. As they say in the Navy, there is no wrong hole. Anyway, the blade by comparison has the reference arrows laser engraved on the spine, showing which holes are the locking set screw. You can kind of see it right here. It says lock and has an arrow. Those are not present on the Trident. I just wanted to get on briefly and then just to drive the point home what I meant by that locking screw. Reference arrow being pointed at the wrong thing. This is the TRU Ball Rave. So what I think they did was they took this this little laser design here. I think this is laser etched or anodized. I don't know enough about anodizing. But I think what they did was they took this design here and then just adapted it to the Trident. So what you get is a similar design. This is the Trident, and then here's the reference mark for the locking set screw. Unfortunately, the actual locking set screw is here as opposed to here. So does that make a big difference? Not really. I mean, you kind of get it because there's nothing actually to stick an Allen key through here. This is just them drilling through the hole on the other side for the case screw that holds it, that holds the casing together. So the arrow is supposed to be pointing here as opposed to here. Is it a nitpick? I'll let you decide. I don't think so. I think they should have done something different, like laser it on the top, maybe, and then just point it down here as opposed to have it pointing at a hole that is not the right hole. For all the technology they put into the release and all the benefits they espouse on it, there are actually releases that are significantly less expensive that will get you similar results in most aspects. The things the Trident has going for it are it doesn't require you to cock it, and it has the unique new factor. For example, we have this release right here. This is the Stanislavski Axis release. It is new for 2023. It's an open hook design. It also comes with a buckle wrist strap. So this release costs $199 and actually functions very similarly to the Trident. I'll be doing a video on it eventually. It relies on tension from the bowstring to pull its hook open, and it opens similarly to the Trident with the swinging door style. The trigger doesn't require a lot of travel to activate, but it doesn't have a defined wall and break point, and the trigger pull is separated from the tension on the hook. I don't know how the mechanism works on this one exactly. It's actually the same mechanism as the Solex, which is a wrist release. So depending on whether you let go of the thumb barrel after the shot, the release will either reset itself via the return spring under the hook, or you just press the trigger and the hook resets itself. It doesn't have adjustable finger sweep, but if it fits your hand, it'll do everything else the Trident does, and it comes with a buckle strap. Are the additional features of the Trident worth the extra cost? I'll leave that up to you, but the triggers on this one feel very similar to this one, and this one can cost up to $150 less. So, food for thought. So for everyone who sat through all that, I thank you for your time. For everyone who skipped to this part, thanks anyway, though I would encourage you to watch the rest at your convenience to show exactly what I came up with to arrive at these conclusions. Anyway, here's a summary or speed round on the TRU Ball Trident. I was gonna try and speak like double speed, but yeah, that's not gonna pan out well. I keep stumbling over things before I get finished. So the Trident comes in aluminum or half aluminum, half brass, medium, or large. It arrives in the package as a 3-finger, and you have to pay extra to buy the parts to make it a 4-finger. It does not have a crisp trigger. It has a unique system, but the result is a trigger that will give you a similar feel to releases that cost half as much. It's basically the Abyss Extension Flex stuffed into the Blade Pro Flex body and without the resistance activated mode. So it's a thumb release that behaves like a really, really lightly sprung resistance release where you have to press the trigger in to release the safety. If you're looking for a thumb release with a crisp break and a short travel, you are going to be disappointed. The ergonomics are like the blade because it is the blade, just with different guts. It does not need to be cocked. It can't be locked onto a D-loop due to the open hook design. You have to buy the 4-finger attachment separately, but it comes with a lanyard. It does not come with any tools. The fit and finish is good, but not as good as the blade. It comes in medium and large, but TRU Ball uses the same finger attachments for both, so the fit isn't going to have as much of a fitted feel as other release brands. Lastly, to use a phrase from across the pond, it's nice, but it's bloody expensive, and it may or may not perform better than what you are already using. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Until next time, take care, stay safe, and happy hunting. So, the Trident comes in a blister pack, like all of TRU Ball's releases and other products. It doesn't come in a fancy box like the other similar